While I'm not a fan of giving games a numerical score, there's no hesitation in me giving the Resident Evil Remake a 10 out of 10. It's the best that survival horror has to offer, bar none. Depending on what day of the week you ask me, either this, Resident Evil 4, or Deus Ex is my favorite game. It's also the best showing of what a remake is. A director coming back with better technology to create an experience with what he had in mind the first time around. A far cry from the nostalgia baiting and creative stagnation in most remakes these days. Games that, while good, failed to reach the highs of their original. That's not the case with the Resident Evil remake. It exceeds the original. The additions and changes from the original add further layers to the decision-making process. The end result is the best survival horror experience in how it balances exploration, resource management, and combat. Sure, some of the goofy charm of the original is lost.
How about Captain Wesker?
He is sleeping with the ultimate failure.
But more than makes up for it on the gameplay front. Before we begin, yes, I have done a video on the Resident Evil remake in the past, one in the earlier days of the channel, one I wasn't 100% happy with. Capcom can remake their games, then I can remake my videos, damn it. Check the description or pinned comment if you're interested in the mods I bring up. And special shout out to my fellow Boulder punchers for supporting the channel through Patreon and YouTube memberships. If you want earlier access to videos, consider joining the family, son. Grab yourself a Jill sandwich and let's dive in.
Jill.
Barry, I didn't mean to get you that excited.
Right.
I'm sure we all know the story by now. The date? Late July of 1998. The location? Raccoon City. The STARS Alpha Team, STARS standing for Special Tactics and Rescue Services, is out looking for the missing Bravo Team. The Bravo Team were investigating the Raccoon Forest and Arcade Mountain area. There have been a number of bizarre murders as of late in the area. The perpetrators have been eating their victims. There's been no contact from the Bravo Team since dawn. Finding Bravo Team's downed helicopter, the Alpha Team comes under attack by a pack of vicious dogs. The helicopter, piloted by Brad, hightails it out of there.
Hey, Brad! Where the hell's he going?
Remaining members make a run to a nearby mansion for safety, and we enter the survival horror. The only ones left are Barry Burton, Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, and Albert Wesker. And that can also vary on which character you decide to play as. We have the choice between playing as Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine. But before you decide who to play as, you're given one question. How do you like your games? As opposed to a standard difficulty selector, you're given a couple of answers to choose from. Do you like climbing a mountain or going for a hike? The game has climbing a mountain as the default choice, and is the game's normal mode, with hike being the easy mode. The 2015 remaster added like taking a walk as an answer, the game journalist difficulty, where enemies deal out less damage and go down faster, along with the tweaks of easy mode. Easy offers more resources and less enemies than normal mode, along with a few other tweaks. After this selection, then we could choose our character. Two interesting things to note. No longer does the game mention that Chris is hard mode and Jill is easy mode, something the original did. The original did not have the question of asking us how we like our games. Another thing to note that Chris is the default select, as he was in the original. Like the game is nudging you to play his campaign first. That said, I always prefer to play as Jill first. Jill and Chris have several notable trade-offs in how they play. Jill has 8 inventory slots, while Chris has 6. Jill can get a grenade launcher and earlier access to the shotgun. Jill has a lockpick to unlock certain doors, whereas Chris will need to find old keys to open said doors. Jill's lockpick does not take up an inventory slot. The old key requires one of Chris's item slots and has a one-time use. Chris has a lighter that doesn't take up an inventory slot, whereas Jill will need a free slot to use the lighter, a key item to have on hand for some of the game's more interesting challenges. Chris can tank more damage from enemies before dying, and has more opportunities for free heals. Jill's campaign will have Barry Burton in the mix, while Chris's campaign will have surviving Bravo team member Rebecca Chambers. 6 years may not seem like much these days with regard to changes in games and graphic fidelity. Some games take that long to develop today, if not longer. But the changes between the release of the 1996 original and the 2002 remake was astronomical. The jump between the 5th generation to the 6th generation was a game changer in more ways than one. The team had a lot more firepower in hand with the GameCube compared to the original PlayStation. This leap in graphic fidelity resulted in a change in how they modeled characters. The team auditioned models to capture the likeness of. They didn't want to end up with the possibility of a lawsuit on basing a character's look off of someone without their permission. The model for Jill was Julia Voth, who they would use up until Resident Evil Revelations before a change. To myself and to many, this is the face of Jill Valentine. While she'd have many different looks and appearances, this is the Jill that pops to mind when I think of her. Although personality-wise, I prefer Jill in her action girl era from Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. The original Resident Evil 3, not the Jill who would like to speak to her manager from the remake of 3. Years later, Julia Voth would go on to do some cosplay of Jill Valentine. One of Jill on the streets and one beneath the sheets. God bless that woman. The face model for Chris is where things get fuzzy. The Resident Evil wiki lists Matt Mullen as the face model for Chris. Thing is, this has never been 100% confirmed. There's a blog that I'll link to in the pinned comment and video description that does a deep dive into the face models for the Resident Evil remake. Another possible candidate for the face model of Chris is Ruben Langdon. Best known as the voice and motion capture of Dante from Devil May Cry 3 and onward, he does have experience as Chris in the series. He did the motion capture for Chris in Code Veronica, Resident Evil 5, and Resident Evil 6. The author of the blog was able to get in contact with Ruben to get an answer. Ruben didn't have a concrete one, suggesting that Capcom mixed and matched a few models for the end result of Chris. The same case goes for Barry and Wesker. There's never been 100% confirmation on the basis for their models. It may be a case like Chris where it's a mishmash of models. For Rebecca, they base her looks off Japanese pop star Ayumi Hamasaki. Another major change between the two titles is the appearance of the Spencer estate. Of all the changes made, the mansion received the most overhauls, most notable being appearance and atmosphere-wise in the entrance hall. In the original, it is well lit, and had a sterile feel to it. The remake goes for a more spooky mansion horror trope. The lighting reflects that with heavy use of candles, along with the occasional flash of lightning followed by the sound of thunder. It's been about a couple of months since the T-virus outbreak that took out most of those who reside around and below the mansion. There is something lost with the move from the more sterile feel of the original mansion. That said, the shift to emphasizing a spooky, abandoned mansion does make up for it in ways. It feels more fitting for a mansion crawling with zombies. One of the key reasons director Shinji Mikami wanted to remake the title was on the graphical front, where the team was never quite satisfied with the original's look. And boy, were they able to upgrade on the graphical front, especially with the pre-rendered backgrounds. What Capcom was able to do with the pre-rendered backgrounds from Remake and Zero, which released later in 2002, was astonishing. At the same time, it's a bummer that they more or less act as the swan song of large budget titles using pre-rendered backgrounds. Real-time 3D backgrounds became the name of the game. Resident Evil Code Veronica already made that jump back in 2000. Technology advances allowed for developers to bypass pre-rendered for real-time, but it's a shame the approach more or less died around this time frame. Some indie titles like Elisa keep the pre-rendered style alive, but I'd love to see a return to something pre-rendered with high graphic fidelity. Something in the vein of what they did here and with Resident Evil Zero. While the GameCube offered the team far more flexibility and power, they still had to work with constraints. The team wanted to have more heavy backgrounds with movement. They had to cut down on the use of backgrounds with movement due to hardware constraints like the disk space. The GameCube disc had about 1/3 the storage space of a DVD. So when you get those heavy shots with movement, like the room in the lab basement with the spinning fan, they stand out that much more. To get the game down from 3 discs to 2 on the GameCube was a miracle in of itself. Capcom brought in Nintendo programmers to help the team squeeze as much power out of the GameCube as they could. Do recall this is the earlier days of the GameCube. Now there are issues with the backgrounds in the remaster of the remake. I could never find a concrete source on it. Looking up info on this led to Steam, Reddit, or forum discussions, but it seems that Capcom lost some of these source files for some backgrounds, something that wasn't the case for Resident Evil Zero when they also remastered it. As a result, Capcom had to upscale some backgrounds themselves in ways that could have used another pass. Some rooms they had to recreate in 3D. Not a deal breaker, but they could have done a better job. So as always, leave it up to fans to come up with better solutions. There are several re-upscale mod projects. The one I use is Rescale by Arcturium. This serves as a spiritual successor to the Re-Upscale project mod. Rescale is what I recommend using if you want the best possible quality for backgrounds. Complementing the pre-rendered backgrounds is the camera to make the most out of them. When I think of Resident Evil Remake, the shot that comes to mind is the entering shot on the northwest wing on the first floor of the mansion. This wing is a new addition to the remake. Every time I go through the store, I take a moment to pause and take it all in. The way Jill or Chris looks towards us, bits of light coming through the window. It's one of the most iconic fixed camera shots in any game. It's one of those textbook examples of what fixed cameras can add to the atmosphere of a game. To note, they had to make some adjustments to the camera angles to accommodate for Jill's skirt with her unlockable RE3 costume. No peeking now. When it comes to exploration, no survival horror game does it better than Resident Evil Remake. The looping level design, inventory management, enemy placement, it's the peak of what survival horror offers. It's a strong testament to how much they got right the first go around with the original. And for a good chunk of the game's development, the remake was more or less in line with the original in its progression. The game's development time was around 14 months, which seems insane these days, but do recall development times were shorter back then. As well, they already had a template to work from. Of the game's 14 months development, it was around the 10 to 11 month mark Shinji Mikami decided they needed to switch things up. Most notable being the mansion section of the Spencer estate. For a good reason, it's where you spend most of the game. The original Resident Evil had 113 total rooms, with 58 of those being in the mansion. The remake has a total of 122 rooms, with 56 in the mansion. To be clear, a room is an area with its own loading screen. So why does the remake have fewer rooms in the mansion than the original? After all, it does add new rooms, like the northwest wing that's past the corpse of Kenneth, where you have the hallway of mirrors and the room where you find the armor key, or the graveyard behind the mansion, or the balcony on the west side of the mansion where you use the dog whistle. Where some of the reduction occurs is how some rooms are now merged. For example, the entrance hall in the original was 2 rooms. A loading screen separated the first and second floor. Same case goes for the northeast side of the mansion where the save room is, as well for the west hallway where the save room is. There is one notable removal on the 3rd floor in the remake. One I didn't realize at first, one that was pointed out to me. I did a podcast not that long ago with fellow YouTubers The Electric Underground and Under the Mayo where we talked about the Silent Hill 2 remake and remake culture. It didn't make the podcast, but after recording we chatted more about the Resident Evil 1 remake. Mayo pointed out that the remake removes the room on the 3rd floor where you could see the helipad. That little glimpse of a possible escape route isn't present in the remake for whatever reason. Item placement progression sees a departure from the original. In 1996, Resident Evil had you collect 4 crests to gain access to the courtyard. In the remake, you need to collect 4 masks to use in the crypt to gain the item required to access the courtyard. Keys are in different spots. In the original, you find the armor key by removing the plants in the greenhouse. For the remake, you need to get the indention key and replace it with the real armor key. Some rooms you won't access until later, like the northeast room on the 1st floor in the entrance hall. One of the notable ways the game throws off those who've played the original is the infamous dog hallway. The remake, the first time through, you're on edge, and the game gets you with a crack at the window. But no dogs. It's only when you return from the other direction that they'll break through the windows. This northeast section has one of the more interesting changes to the mansion. In the original, if you wanted to return to the entrance hall, you could take the 1st floor route past the dog room, or you could take the 2nd floor. In the remake, you have the addition of making your way back to the entrance hall through the crypt. You can unlock a shortcut in the room with the painting puzzle to access the crypt, giving you 3 ways of returning to the entrance hall from the east side. Even then, there's another factor you have to take into consideration in the game's early stretch. The door on the 1st floor of the east staircase, the one with the save room at the base of the stairs, has seen better days. This doorknob will break after 2 uses. You can still use the door, only from the south side, not from the north side, the one that gives you access to 2 ways back to the main hall. If you're on the north side, the only way back to the entrance hall is from the 2nd floor. Now this doesn't last the whole game. When you return to the mansion after the residence section, the doorknob receives some repairs. Barry will fix it if you're playing as Jill, being the bro that he is. Wesker will fix the doorknob for Chris. A small change, but this doorknob usage adds a further layer of decision making to the earlier stretch in the mansion. The way the mansion loops back on itself while unlocking further shortcuts is sheer bliss. Many other games, both Resident Evil or otherwise, have made great attempts to looping level design, but none in my mind have topped how the mansion unfolds in the Resident Evil Remake. Not only is exploration in top form, but the Resident Evil Remake offers an excellent combat system full of decision making, where every enemy you come across is a threat, and you have to take into consideration your limited resources. One way of dealing with combat is avoiding it altogether. Save your resources and ammo for another day. But through Remake's design, avoiding enemies is an involved process on several fronts. It's one of the best examples of tank controls adding nuance and tension, where each zombie you come across can pose a threat. The evasion of zombies is far more involved compared to the 1996 original. If you backed off when a zombie was in range, at some point they'll lose interest and turn away, giving you a generous opportunity to get by. Rooms and hallways are wider and more sparse in the original. The remake has narrow hallways and limits space further with the addition of dressers or drawers. But the biggest change is the aggression of zombies. Once in range, their focus is on you and only you. It's not like the original where you can back up until they lose interest for a moment, giving you a chance to run by. You can try to bypass them as is, but with the narrow hallways, it's more or less a guarantee they're going to enjoy a little snack. That said, there are opportunities you can open up to squeeze by. You need to bait out one of their lunges. If you get in range, they'll take a lunge. Back up at that moment and you'll have a small window in which you can run past. Even then, it could still be a crapshoot. Some may do a second lunge right after, which can catch you if you weren't fast enough. As well, goading out their lunge needs to be precise. There were several times throughout where I wasn't able to get the distance right to get them to lunge. It's a small window of evasion, and there were several times throughout my playthrough where my timing is off, resulting in a zombie grabbing me. It's one of the best showings where tank controls offer plenty of nuance, and making the evasion of a single zombie a tense, involved affair. While it doesn't look like much, there's plenty of satisfaction to be had if you're able to avoid a lunge and squeeze by. It's one of those elements you could trivialize if you use the alternate control scheme that was added in the 2015 remaster, where you could use the analog stick to control your character more like a traditional game, where you could spin around over and over to bait out lunges. A lot of the tension, nuance, and satisfaction is now gone. Other tense moments arise when zombies aren't facing your direction, or they're not yet aware of your presence. These moments are always a real crapshoot. You could go up to them, have them turn, and make your attempt at a dodge. or you could take a chance and run by with the opening. Even then, these can be a real crapshoot. In the original, if you had a situation like this, a zombie will take a bit of time to turn while you run by. There's far less time in the remake before they make a lunge for you. More often than not, these resulted in a zombie grab. Yet a zombie grab isn't a guarantee that you'll take damage. A new addition to the remake is the use of defense items. If an enemy, zombie or otherwise, have you in a grab animation, you can use a defense item to free yourself without a loss of health, along with dealing damage. Defense items don't take up precious inventory slots and can be set to manual or auto use. I always prefer to set to manual. In some cases, you may want to take the damage and save your defense items for another situation, or you may not have the right one equipped for the given situation. Both Jill and Chris have access to the dagger as a defense item. These are most common. For Jill, she has access to the stun gun. This deals far more damage to enemies compared to the dagger. Chris has the far more powerful and interesting option with the flash grenade. Shoving it into the enemy's mouth, this will kill and decapitate their recipient. There is a bit of cooldown before the grenade goes off. You can speed up the process by shooting the grenade. If you play your cards right, you can kill other enemies in the process. The flash grenade is generous with its splash damage. Of course, you have to be careful that you're not in range when it explodes. The defense items are a great addition to the game, and add another layer of decision making that the player needs to consider, especially if you set their usage to manual. Of course, you have more conventional options for killing enemies, one being the knife. You can knife them while they're downed after taking enough damage. Or you could play the juke and evasion game of taking a swipe, backing off, rinse and repeat. This takes several slashes, more so with Jill who does less damage with the knife. Another option is the handgun. It's going to take a while to take a zombie down or any enemy with one. Several rounds may only put down a zombie for a time. That said, there is a possibility of a critical hit, in which a shot results in a decapitation. Something that you'll want for more reasons than one. Chris has a higher probability of a critical headshot, happening twice as often as Jill. A trade-off as Jill has easier and earlier access to the shotgun. Shotgun is where the game gets interesting with what they do with it behind the scenes. In the original, a shotgun to the head was a guaranteed kill against zombies. It's not a guarantee in the remake that you'll take their head clean off. There's some RNG involved with how the shotgun works here. RNG can be tricky to integrate in a way that enhances a game's experience. The example within the series where I found RNG took away from the experience was the Resident Evil 4 remake. In the original RE4, a headshot or kneecap to base enemies would put them into a stagger every time. That wasn't a guarantee in the remake. While the addition of a parry did offset this to an extent, it did clash with the game's faster pace and focus on action. But what about here for the RNG of the shotgun? I found it works well due to the slower pace and greater emphasis on resource management. There are some interesting quirks to this system. The first headshot after loading a save is a guaranteed decapitation against the zombie. Some headshots will kill them but not decapitate the zombie, which can come back to haunt you down the line. More on that shortly. Another reason why Jill has an easier time in the Spencer state is access to the grenade launcher. You could grab it off the corpse of Forrest. There's 3 ammo types, the base shell, acid shells, and incendiary shells. The acid shell works wonders against the hunters. The odds are in your favor that one acid shell is all you need to kill. Incendiary shells are most useful against zombies, as you'll burn the bodies for good. Something you'll want to do. Down zombies that you don't burn or decapitate will come back to haunt you in one of the remake's best additions, the Crimson Heads. Like the changes to the mansion, this addition was made later in the game's development. Of the game's 14-month development time, they added Crimson Heads in around the 10 to 11 month mark. An addition that adds another roadblock and a layer to the decision-making process. Depending on your selected difficulty, down zombies will rise as Crimson Heads after a certain amount of time. Higher the difficulty level, the sooner they'll come back. And they are vicious. They'll make a beeline for you at an incredible speed, going for a swipe or a bite. You can get a nice preview of what the Crimson Heads are capable of outside the entrance to the room where you get the armor key. Once you have the imitation key, he'll rise as you approach the door. If you try to dispose of him earlier by burning him, he'll put a stop to that and rise. The best way to deal with Crimson Heads is not by giving them the chance to rise in the first place. Juke past zombies and leave them as is. Decapitate them with one of your guns. If you're playing as Jill, use incendiary rounds with a grenade launcher to burn the bodies. Or you can use kerosene to burn the bodies of downed zombies. There are 5 kerosene containers in the game. You could use these containers to fill your canteen. You could use your fuel canteen twice before needing to refill it once again. On the normal difficulty, each kerosene container has 4 refills, 5 on the easier ones. To burn a body, you need your fuel canteen on hand with some kerosene along with a lighter. This is another one of those great trade-offs between playing as Jill or Chris. While Chris has only 6 inventory slots, he only requires 1 slot to burn a body. he already has the lighter on hand. Now he only needs a fuel canteen. While Jill has 8 inventory slots, burning a down zombie requires 2 slots. The lighter burns up an extra item slot, no pun intended. If you play your cards right, you can burn more than one body at once. If you down zombies in the same spot, you can burn several bodies. Depending on the situation, you may not have your fuel canteen and the lighter if you're playing as Jill on hand. Precious inventory slots you could use for something else, or to keep free on your excursions. If it's a room you frequent on the regular, you'll have to keep in mind for future revisits. Make a stop by an item box to get what you need for your next visit. Of course, depending on how much time has passed, those down zombies you're hoping to burn are now Crimson Heads. During my playthrough for this video, I had a great moment of Crimson Head emerging at the worst possible time. If Yon the Snake poisons Chris during the first encounter, you'll switch to Rebecca to grab the serum. The serum resides in the western section of the mansion on the first floor, where the save room is. So what better time for a Crimson Head to arise, while playing as Rebecca, only packing a handgun. Crimson Heads are such an excellent addition to the game, and can throw a wrench into your plans. They're an addition that always keeps you on your toes and punishes you for sloppy play. It keeps backtracking fresh and tense, depending on how you play. That knowledge of revisiting an old area with down zombies could add plenty of tension and invoke further decision making. It's a mechanic that I wish more survival horror titles would make use of. Well, if done right. 2022 title Signalis did have something similar, although I didn't find the return of enemies to be much of a threat. The 2024 World War I survival horror conscript did something similar with rats. Down zombies that you didn't burn would draw rats to them after a period of time. Rats would make a beeline for you and you could do some serious damage if your dodge timing was off. While I didn't have a major issue with the rats, it was one of the most common criticisms of conscript. They had more frustration than challenge in the mind of most players, to the point where they received a noticeable nerf in the patch. While I focused on zombies as they are the primary enemy type, there are several others to deal with, like the Cerberus, aka those pesky dogs. Most pesky while trying to pick up the collar out on the balcony. I hate to admit I died to these buggers more than I wished for while trying to get the collar. There's something about that narrow space and the timing of the second dog that always throws me off, especially while playing as Jill with her lower health levels. Beyond the zombies and dogs, the other main nuisance number-wise are the hunters. Upon returning to the mansion after clearing out the residents, they'll emerge. They're a whole different bag to deal with. As mentioned, the acid rounds that Jill can use with the grenade launcher does wonders against them. You can find a magnum with both Jill and Chris that can make short work of them. For Chris, this is a great time to make use of those flash grenades. End up in a grab and plant one to deal with them. Hunters are less vicious than they were in the original. In the 1996 versions, their attacks are faster, giving you less time to retaliate. That said, there's still no pushover here. The last thing you want is to end up in that range where they can get an instant kill no matter what your health level is at. I had a couple of cases of getting cocky with hunters and not saving for a while to come back and haunt me. Interesting to note, they did cut out the decapitation death, something present in the original and in the earlier stages of development of the remake. It's when you mix in the exploration with resource management and combat that you end up with this flow that few survival horror titles can match, where you're making larger decisions, like where you're going to go next, with several smaller decisions along the way. When was the last time you saved? Is now a good time to save? Which weapons are you going to take with you? How much ammo? What are your health levels at? Should I take a healing item with me, burning up an item slot? How many item slots should I keep free? That way I'm going. What enemies are along the way? Are there down zombies there? Should I bring some kerosene with me along with the lighter if I'm Jill? Do I have enough kerosene in my canteen? Where's the nearest kerosene container that I can use to refill? What if they're now a Crimson Head? Of course, the game doesn't remain static throughout. Clearing out a hallway isn't a guarantee it will always be clear. New zombies or hunters will come waltzing in to always keep you on edge. There are no hit pouches to expand your inventory like other titles in the series. What you start with is what you get. The end result is the best juggling of exploration, combat, and resource management in any survival horror title. Other games in the series have done a great job with limited inventories, but not to the level that the remake was able to reach. And it is such a delicate balance, where it comes so close to becoming frustrating. Instead, it adds so much tension and a layer of decision making that adds so much to the game. It's why I never fault a survival horror title that forgoes using a limited inventory. It's tough to balance item placement, storage placement, how many slots to give the player. Games like Signalis received further patches to deal with complaints about the limited inventory. Ones I did agree with, like some items that took up inventory slots that shouldn't have. When Silent Hill 4 took a crack at a limited inventory, something new to the series at the time, the end result created far more frustrations than adding to the experience. Some of my favorite survival horror titles don't have you contending with a limited inventory. They may focus more on puzzles or the atmosphere, but when you get limited inventories right, like in the Resident Evil Remake, it adds so much to the experience. Something you can't have otherwise. While I'm not huge into speedrunning, if I were to speedrun a game, this would be it. It's fascinating to watch speedruns and see what people can do with a game. As of writing, the speedrunner Pessimism has the world record in several categories. About 48.5 minutes for Jill and 49.5 minutes for Chris for any percentage runs. For best ending runs, about 52.5 minutes for Jill and 53.5 minutes for Chris. One fun trick I learned from watching speedruns is the scare skate trick. If you hit the run button rapidly, Chris or Jill will skip some of their animations while moving on stairs, allowing for faster movement. Thing is, this gets quite tiring. What you want to do is map the right analog stick to sprint whenever you use it. That way you could go up and down stairs in a way that looks like skating with minimal strain. Check the pinned comment in your description to a link for a video on how to set that up. To bounce out everything else, there's several puzzles throughout the remake as palette cleansers. Puzzles that are self-contained, don't take long to do, but offer satisfaction upon solving. Resident Evil has always been great with these kind of puzzles. With how much juggling we do with exploration, combat, and item management, these kind of puzzles are a perfect fit for the game. The remake has a few additional puzzles, along with tweaks to ones in the original. For example, the painting puzzle in the Crow Room now requires you to light the right colors as opposed to lighting the paintings in the right order. The remake cuts back on some of the box pushing puzzles, like the Armor Room. Now you have to push the armor sets in the right order as opposed to pushing boxes. That said, there are a couple puzzles that I preferred how they were in the original, like how you unlock the drugstore room in the Residence. In the original, you had to light up the 3x3 panel. A classic puzzle. Light up this button, but the others connected to it will switch. You could get the answer for this with the pool table, or you could brute force your way through it, something I always preferred doing. Choice was yours. In the remake, you have to go to a nearby room and make note of the colors of the eyes with the pool balls. More of a regurgitation puzzle, one I've never been a fan of. Plus it's annoying if you're playing as Jill where you'll need to run back to an item box to grab the lighter if you don't have it on you. Another I prefer in the original is finding the login code for the computer in the lab section. I preferred having to decipher the symbols as opposed to deciphering the password from the X-ray placement. Plus, I love that little gesture Chris or Jill will do when they succeed with the password, something absent in the remake. Still, that's a minor complaint. It's not like these two shifts are a major downgrade, but ones to note. You take these puzzles and combine them with changes to progression, item placement, crimson zombies, and other changes, you end up with a more challenging and engaging experience than the 1996 original. To the point where some say you don't need to bother with the original. Something I don't agree with. Is Remake the better title? 100%. But there are changes to Remake that result in lost that goofy charm that the original had in droves. Most notable being around the voice acting and the script. For the 1996 original, the team didn't give much thought to localization and getting voice actors. The end result is a script with some hammy, unnatural dialogue with appropriate voice acting to boot. Unintentional hilarity that added an amateurish charm to the game that was never the team's intention.
Whoa! What is it?
What? Oh! Oh no! Sorry, I didn't mean to do that.
You must be from the Bravo team.
It's a weapon. It's really powerful, especially against living things. Better take it with you.
But how about you, Barry?
I have this.
Are you okay?
Yeah, so much for him. We got to the root of the problem.
You have wonderful talent.
I would never work for a company like Umbrella. And Wesker, you were formerly with Umbrella.
This was something they cleared up moving forward in the series. They still kept the cheese factor, but in a more intentional way. The spotty localization is one of the key reasons Shinji Mikami and the staff wanted to remake the game. The essence of the infamous Jill sandwich line is still present, but said in a way that's a bit more natural.
Oh, Barry!
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right.
Barry.
That was a close one. A second late, you would have fit nicely into a sandwich.
Barry comes across as more as the dad of the group, both in a literal and figurative sense.
What about you?
Oh, don't worry. I like the buddy system we have here.
I see.
Instead of sounding like a confused high schooler, Jill is more calm and level-headed. The same goes for Chris. No longer does he sound like someone who's doing a voiceover for a as-seen-on-TV product, although they have a tendency to trip themselves up on the regular. Wesker receives an overhaul more in line with his future appearances in the series. The 1996 Wesker came across as a mustache twirler out of his league during the betrayal scene. Here, he's cold and calculated. Betrayal scene now happens in the Tyrant Room, as opposed to the awkward shuffle from outside the Tyrant Room and into it. And of all the cheesy moments in the original script, Chris laughing at Wesker and the Tyrant is near the top of how memorable it is. Wesker gets all flustered by Chris's reaction. It's hilarious in ways the team didn't have in mind.
This is the ultimate life form. Tyrant. Stop it.
Wesker, you're pitiful.
For the remake, Chris does still laugh, but it's a different kind of laugh, and one that doesn't fluster Wesker. It doesn't undercut the scene, but keeps the spirit of the original.
The ultimate life form. Tyrant.
Wesker, you've become senile.
Chris, you'll never understand.
It's Rebecca's character where issues arise when you take the events of Resident Evil 0 into consideration. There's a bit later on in the remake where she's cornered by a hunter. As Chris, you have the option of saving her. Now, to be fair, Rebecca doesn't seem to have much on hand to deal with the hunter. For the optional bits where we could play as her, she has a handgun, no additional ammo, and a first aid spray. Not the best loadout for dealing with a hunter. Besides, it's not like she's familiar with the idea of item boxes. The events of the night before had her dropping items on the ground. That said, considering what she went through the previous night, including taking down a tyrant on her own, this is a total clash with her character. The Rebecca we saw in Zero would never let a single hunter get the drop on her. Again, it's been a couple of long nights for Rebecca. She's been through a lot. There's a sweet tender scene between her and Chris where she breaks down crying. All the monsters she's dealt with, friends and comrades lost, the memory of lugging around a hookshot. Remove the scene with the hunter and you have far less issues with her character clashes between the two games. Besides, the game makes up for it with her possible death in the final fight with the tyrant. Unlike the original, it's no longer a solo fight. She'll join Chris, while Barry will join Jill. It's possible the tyrant could kill them during the fight, changing the ending. While Resident Evil has never been consistent with voice actors across titles, Rebecca's is the most egregious example. Zero and Remake came out about 8 months apart, yet Rebecca has a different voice for each game.
This room is equipped with all sorts of medical supplies. I could pretty much treat any wound. Want me to treat your wounds?
You expect me to trust you, a wanted felon? I don't need your help. I can handle this on my own. And don't call me little girl.
One of the funnier bits in the remake is how the Moonlight Sonata scene unfolds with Chris and Rebecca. Chris doesn't have the musical talents of Jill. He can't read the sheet music. So in comes Rebecca and says, "That sounded like Moonlight Sonata." Where in the world did you get that from, Rebecca?
It's me, Chris.
To be fair, she mentions this after looking at the sheet music on the piano. I know Rebecca is kind and considerate, but telling Chris that his attempt sounded like Moonlight Sonata is a bit much. Something you might tell like a 5-year-old, but not a grown man. I brought this up in my video on the original Resident Evil 2, but I assume the Les Paul guitar in the STARS office is Chris's guitar. While Jill shows musical talent, she doesn't strike me as a Les Paul kind of girl, or one to bring her guitar to work. Les Paul guitars aren't cheap. I could see Chris going to a guitar store and buying the most expensive one to impress his team. He wouldn't start with something cheaper. He'd go right to the high end. I could see him practicing in the office instead of at home, annoying his team. Rebecca, being too kind, gives him a thumbs up as part of her dies inside as she listens to Chris make another attempt at Stairway to Heaven. And then Chris has the audacity to smack talk her first attempt at Moonlight Sonata. Yeah, it's a bit off, but at least you could tell it's Moonlight Sonata as opposed to whatever the hell you were playing.
What was that?
My interpretation is off a little.
One addition to the character roster of the remake is Lisa Trevor. We won't see her until after the first stretch of the mansion, but we can hear her at the back of the entrance hall. Before we can gain access to the residence, we'll have to go to a cabin where she resides, and where she gets the drop on us. Through notes, her tragic backstory will unfold. Lisa is the daughter of Jessica and George Trevor. George was the architect that Oswald Spencer hired to build the mansion back in the 60s. Spencer had Lisa and Jessica detained as test subjects of the progenitor virus. Lisa's mother, Jessica, did not respond well to it, but the virus responded well to Lisa. She gained incredible strength and regenerative abilities to the detriment of her mind. She's been beneath the estate ever since, with her knowledge only known to a select few among the staff of Umbrella. You don't want to get anywhere near her. While not fast, her attacks have a large hitbox. Bullets are useless against her. In the original game, we access the lab through the underground caves we can access through the courtyard. In the remake, we access the lab from the entrance hall in the mansion. We got a couple of late game items to unlock the door leading down to where we heard Lisa earlier. Beyond the final fight with Tyrant, the decision you make here with Jill will determine Barry's fate. Give him back his Magnum and he'll assist you in the fight against Lisa. Refuse and Lisa will kill Barry, giving you access to the Magnum, one that inflicts insane amount of damage. Funny to note that in the game's intro, if you run back to Barry after the appearance of the first zombie, it takes 3 Magnum bullets for the zombie to die. Ah, the power that cutscenes can offer to friend or foe.
Look out! It's a monster!
Let me take care of it!
Barry's possible fate differs compared to the original. There, he could die if you didn't wait around for him to return with a rope after the second fight with Yawn, or if you didn't go with him during the underground section. At the conclusion of this fight with Lisa, she will find the skull of her mother, before leaping into the abyss below. And even then, that's not enough to kill her. In the on-rails shooter spin-off The Umbrella Chronicles, while escaping the mansion, Wesker will run into her. Lisa at long last comes to die as a result of the mansion exploding. Her suffering is now over. It's a welcome expansion on the original story, with Lisa being one of the most tragic characters in the Resident Evil universe. While the mansion received most of the overhauls, I do want to bring up a couple of changes to the Resident section. As mentioned earlier, when I think of the camera shots of the RE1 remake, the first one that pops to mind is the shot in the northeast hallway on the first floor. The second is the introduction of the spider crawling down from the roof in the residence. Hell of an intro to a new enemy type. Spider enemies have become more of a contentious issue type in recent years. Note their absence in Resident Evil 2 Remake. I'd have to guess the increase in graphic fidelity is the key reason. Over and over, studies show spiders are the animals people fear most. One accessibility option that's becoming more common is an arachnophobia mode. Recent titles like Hogwarts Legacy and Star Wars Jedi Survivor include this mode. I looked up if anyone made a mod that removes these spiders from Resident Evil Remake, and lo and behold, I did find one. Along with spiders, sharks are a grave fear for many people, and the remake overhauls the Resident section with them. They came across as a bit silly with the room you found them in the original. This area receives far greater expansion with what you need to do. It's a great addition of a simple puzzle with a countdown of dealing with the water levels as the sharks try to get you. If you're like me, I'm sure your first playthrough had you clenching your butt cheeks after zapping the shark and grabbing the key next to it. Are we sure it's dead? That said, this expansion of this area leads to one of the more annoying optional backtracking sections. As Jill, you can fight the Plant 42 boss or make V-Jolt to bypass the boss altogether. As Chris, if you weren't able to save Richard in the mansion, Rebecca will go assemble the V-Jolt to deal with the Plant 42, else Chris will fight it on its own. The thing is, the path from the drug room where you assemble the V-Jolt to where you use it is far longer than the original. With the water drained, you can't cross the boxes to get back to the shark room from the front. You have to take a longer path and ascend some ladders before you reach that room. To the point of whenever I replay the game, I end up fighting Plant 42 to save the hassle. Again, that's a minor quibble in the grand scheme of things, but one of those elements that the original did a better job of. And the end result is a title that expands on the original, but stays faithful to what it's working with. The runtime is a bit longer, but they didn't blow it out, instead focusing on offering an experience with high replayability. It's not like they took the original's runtime and blew it out to twice the length. I mean, what kind of remake would even think of doing something so disgusting? Unlocks include harder difficulties and more outfits. There's a mode that changes item boxes to be independent of one another as opposed to being connected. Another mode is the self-explanatory invisible enemy mode. There's plenty of amusement to be had with using a dagger during a zombie grab. Now you'll have a floating dagger pursuing you. If you want to go further outside the wheelhouse, you can check out the Remake randomizer. You could choose to randomize the placement of items, enemies, doors, or locks. This can throw you for a loop trying to keep track of everything. You could end up in amusing scenarios where there's a different enemy in the cutscene in the map room. Or have you on the snake in place of sharks in the shark room. The door randomizer will change the layout of the game. You'll never know where you'll end up next. If you're a veteran of the game looking for a new spin, randomizers are a whole new ballgame. For several years, the Resident Evil Remake was only available on Nintendo consoles, the GameCube release in 2002 and Wii release in 2009. It wasn't until early 2015 with the HD Remaster did it make its way to PlayStation, Xbox, and PC. One that set sales records. The HD Remaster became Capcom's fastest digital title at the time, along with most day one sales on the PlayStation Network. While I couldn't find concrete information on it, I'm guessing the sales success of the HD Remaster played a role in Capcom giving the green light to begin development of the Resident Evil 2 remake. Sales-wise, Capcom did learn their lesson about the demand for remakes. As of writing, Resident Evil 2 Remake is the highest selling title in the franchise. But there's another lesson from the success with the HD Remaster that they didn't seem to take into mind. That being that there's still an audience for fixed camera, tank control titles. Early in development of the Resident Evil 2 remake, they did have the option of changing to a fixed camera perspective, something they ended up cutting. Something that if you want to experience, you'll need to turn to the world of mods. And even then it gets you about 90% of the way there. There's still some foundational issues it clashes with the original game. I talked about this at large in my video on camera mods for survival horror titles, but I'm begging Capcom to take another shot at fixed cameras. Resident Evil spin-off or otherwise. They still make original IPs, why not take a crack at a new IP? It's been so long since they made a fixed camera title. Prove me wrong that there's not a large enough audience for them in the large budget range. Instead, it seems like the remake train will continue as long as they continue to sell in high numbers, creative bankruptcy be damned. And, well, I don't blame them. The end of the RE4 remake DLC did hint toward a remake of 5, but there's been little on that front. There's also been rumors of a Code Veronica and Zero remake. No thanks, bro. Depending on what day of the week you ask me, those two in Resident Evil 3 Remake are the worst of the mainline series. And worst of all, rumors of another remake of the original for the series' 30th anniversary in 2026. What would they call that? Remake? The world already has one Riri. We don't need more. But there will be people reeing at the top of their lungs, myself included, if they go down the road of doing another remake of the original. One is enough. Because what we have here is the gold standard of survival horror gameplay and what a remake can do. A director coming back a few years later with better technology to take another crack at it. Gameplay additions and changes that add several more layers to the decision-making process. No game within the survival horror world is able to reach the same levels as what the remake offers. Other titles in the series have come close, but never to the level that they achieve here. End result is a game that, depending on what day of the week you ask me, is the greatest game ever made. Survival horror or otherwise. It goes back and forth with Deus Ex and Resident Evil 4 as the GOAT. And I know for many, you're in the same boat. Thanks for watching. Special shout out to my fellow Boulder Punchers for the extra support on Patreon or YouTube memberships. For those in the thank you for your patronage tier, American Boot and Tom Terrible. For those in the now this is Boulder Punching tier, Aleatoric Satan, CH3CH2O, Ethan, the Madman, and Waco. If you'd like to further support the channel, consider joining your fellow Boulder Punchers through Patreon or a YouTube membership. You'll get earlier access to videos, be featured in the credits, receive periodic newsletter updates, and my undying gratitude.